Years ago, I was talking to a pastor's wife, and she asked why her husband had had a stroke and been bedridden and declined for years and then finally died. And she said, "We've been so faithful in ministry, and to have it end like this, I just don't understand why it had to end the way it did." And that's a question we all ask at one time or another. Why? The Bible's no stranger to that question either, even as it accuses God. The 89th Psalm accuses God of being a covenant breaker. Job chapter 30, Job calls God cruel and says he's more compassionate than God is. So the question is, if God's good, why all the suffering? Well, there's a couple of things in the scripture that we can look at. And the first of those is that a lot of what we think of as unfair suffering is really just the consequences of our behavior. Uh, Take a proverb like Proverbs 19:15, where it says, "The lazy will go hungry," or a proverb like 21:17, where it says, "If you love pleasure, you'll become a poor man." And so our behaviors oftentimes bring on our suffering, and we try to blame God because we don't want to deal with the hard truth that really we brought these things on ourselves. Okay, but what about the times when that's not the case? After all, if you look at the life of Job, he didn't do anything to bring that kind of suffering on himself and have his world turned upside down. Well, the Bible also says that suffering can be a transforming tool. As a matter of fact, Psalm 119:71 says, "It was good for me to be afflicted so that I could learn your statutes." And the psalmist came to recognize that there was something that pain could do to him to make him grow, to make him look to God, to make him understand what God's ways were really about and to seek to follow that. Because here's the truth that we don't like to admit either, is that pain does something to us that pleasure can't. In the good times, we just don't seek God like we do when it hurts. When it hurts, we are driven towards deeper understanding, deeper insights, and more life transformation because we are open to it. I've always said there's no chaplains at Disneyland because you're having a good time. You don't need any change. But where there are chaplains is where there's pain, where there is a deeper look at the issues and a seeking for answers. James chapter 1 says that we're to consider it a joy when we encounter these various sufferings and trials in our lives, knowing that the testing of our faith produces endurance, and endurance ultimately matures us. And so God understands that we need this kind of resistance, this kind of difficulty to mature us. He loves us too much to leave us alone, and he has to mature us and bring us to where we can have an eternal place with him. But what about when those aren't the answers? What about when you look at it and go, man, it's not the consequences that's not why I'm suffering. It's not a transforming tool thing. I don't see it. I still am mystified. Why would a good God allow this kind of suffering? And the truth of the matter is, some suffering is just going to be a question mark. We're not going to understand it on this side. We have too limited an understanding of our own circumstances and the way it's playing out in history. But we do understand, as Romans 8:18 says, that the difficulties and sufferings in this time are nothing compared to the eternal weight of glory that awaits us. And somehow, some way, we know that even the difficulty, the pain, the suffering, God is working that to good, to an eternal purpose, to our good for eternity, not just for this time. And so while we want to look and say, no, this needs to make sense right now, we understand that sometimes that's not going to ever work for us. It's never going to come to the place where we go, oh, I get it, I see it all makes sense. But in the end, it will, because nothing is wasted, and God doesn't waste this life, even pain and suffering, in the work that he's doing for your good.